Beyond Good and Evil holds a soundtrack that is very near and dear to people's hearts. How did it accomplish this? Music composer Christophe Heral, who has worked on games such as Rayman Origins, Rayman Legends, and the upcoming Beyond Good and Evil 2, incorporates several easy-to-use techniques useful for any composer. The first of these is a clear melodic focus. Often in the piano, the melody is actually overtly loud in most songs of the soundtrack to good effect. Secondly, Christophe combines both the natural and real instruments with synthetic ones. Lastly, you'll find that repetition is key in not only the melody but the song structure as well. With these three techniques in mind, let's see how Christophe expresses them in this piece, Home Sweet Home. The song is composed in 4/4 time, with a steady tempo of 79 beats per minute. Home Sweet Home is in the key of A sharp minor. In the general mixing of the song, it's actually very compressed, meaning that there are not too many dynamics in the song. You'll find that there are only 3 sections, and each one is usually repeated at least 2 times. This sort of follows a verse-chorus structure like you would see in a traditional pop song. For instruments, we contain an interesting variety. Starting off the top, we have a synthetic swirl of sounds in these 3 synthetic instruments, along with a cymbal and hi-hat combination. Then we have the main melody in the piano, and you'll see the synth bass enter in later, and then the violins. Then for the percussion, we have the tabla, which is an Indian staple. It is accompanied by several deep hits for impact in key moments. Now let's begin with the introduction and section 1A. Home Sweet Home begins with an intriguing sound. As composers, we always must introduce the listeners with something interesting to entice them to investigate more into the song. We can hear a clear tremolo effect on most of these instruments. For this section in particular, take note of the various subdivisions between the instruments. The glass pad holds down the whole note as the bass, and the tremolo synth is actually broken up into 3 individual instruments. Each one of them contains a slightly different tremolo rhythm. This one's sort of like on a 8th note rhythm. This one's slightly varied from this one, and that's the 32nd note. The notes themselves are played on half notes. The last couple additions are the hi-hats and the cymbals. These go along with the tremolo instrument as sort of like a highlight. In the next section, the main melody, the piano, is introduced. This melody sort of evokes a deep sense of sadness and yearning, but at the same time, it isn't completely sad. So while the key we are in the song is in A sharp minor, the piano actually doesn't begin on that note, but on the 2nd scale degree, the C. Another thing to note here is the repetition. These short 1.5 count phrases are a key feature on what makes this song memorable. After repeating this first phrase 4 times, the composer then switches down to F, the 5th of the A sharp key. Here, the repeating nature of this phrase is switched to every measure before repeating. Now, just before the piano reverts back to its first phrase, the synth bass prepares us for the transition. Now, this synth bass is actually a combination of both a purely synthetic bass with an acoustic bass sound. So this is the acoustic bass, and this is the synthetic. You can see that the synthetic is more in the sub-region in the frequency range, and the acoustic bass kind of gives a more mid-range sound. The grouping of these two is symbolic of the entire nature of the score, both synthetic and organic. The notes of the space part is very simple, using whole notes as impact for the beginning of each measure. Now let's play the entire section so you can get a feel of where each instrument is placed. The piano in section 2 takes a deviation and opts for an arpeggio-like pattern. It also for the first time utilizes some bass notes. Now, the first chord here is an A sharp minor, adding the 2 and 4 of the scale degrees. And it's a nice wide open chord voicing to avoid muddying up the mix. The composer repeats the same chord again, with a slight variation at the end. A last note is that he also removes some previous instruments to allow the section to feel a bit different from the last section. So here's that entire section over again. We return to the piano melody in the first section, but with the addition of violins to generate a pulsating rhythm. Everything else here remains the exact same. Now the violins play a fifth interval on the G sharp and D sharp, and remain here for the entire section of the song. Now here, to avoid sounding too repetitive, the composer just added this marcato note. And while we're on this section, let me point out the automation I used on this track. I'll bring it up here. Now notice how I and many composers use a volume automation in particular to help with making the song feel more alive. For example, I sort of use a breathing technique where I inhale and feel that the instrument is rising to a tension point, and then I exhale when the instrument releases. I then automate the volume so it matches this breathing technique. Try to notice when I play this section again, the automation. While we return to section 2, the strings play a prominent role here. They now switch from staccato notes to a more legato section. So let me solo that here. Again, we see the good old use of repetition at play here, with this phrase is repeated for the next 4 measures. Of course, on the second measure, we see the variation here at the end. Let me play the whole thing now. The tabla is the new instrument that is introduced in section 3, so let's take a brief look at its function in the song. It first transitions us to section 3, using this one sound on the drum. And then adds one more additional sound to it. I find that composing for the hand drums like the tabla requires one to not just play on the beat, but to look for various ways to create subdivisions. You'll find that in no measure in this piece is the same for the tabla. Overall, Christophe's use of the tabla here is very minimal, only consisting of 2 main sounds the drum can make at the moment. So I'll solo that here. The next interesting aspect in section 3 is the new piano part. So by visually looking at the piano roll, you can see it's sort of divided into 3 sections. We have this upper section, which is the main melody, then the middle section, which is the ostinato, then we have the lower section, which highlights the chords. So let's solo that here. Starting at the top, the melody here is the highest in the song thus far. Since we just came back from an intense section in the previous one, the high melody here allows the listener to kind of relax a bit. The middle part, the composer literally plays this 3-note pattern throughout the entire section. And then lastly, the 2-note chords at the bottom start off as 5th intervals, but eventually start breaking off into 6th, 7th, 4ths, and later 3rds later on. And then here in section 2C, the violins return for that section, but with the new piano melody as well. Here in the piano, it sort of alternates between D sharp and G sharp, and also lower in the C sharp and F to create this interesting pattern. Now I would point to this section 2C as the climax in the song. Well, let's move on to section 1C. This section is basically the relax point. There's no melody and the strings return to their chugging staccato notes. Occasionally you'll hear the bass rise up in octaves such as at this point. And this point. The tabla also introduces one new sound to the mix, to be a little more complex. Overall, that's pretty much the only thing that's different from the section 1B over here to section 1C. To finish out the song, the piano returns to this part, same exact section. Now nothing is different between 2C and 2D, except that the piano ends on a more melancholic note. Home Sweet Home is a song that instantly grabs your attention when you first hear it. It accomplishes this through the factors we've discussed, mainly that repetition is king in melody. Also, through putting focus on the piano, the other instruments have a chance to build up the emotion the composer is trying to evoke. As we listen to the song one more time, pay attention to first and foremost how it makes you feel. Listen to the steady progression and rise in the song dynamically as well. I hope you have enjoyed this analysis on this great song from Beyond Good and Evil. Thank you.